In this example, I want to demonstrate how to use the frame generator to create this workbench frame that is 1,000 millimeters deep from front to back, from center line to center line, 600 millimeters wide to 600 millimeters tall, and with a cross brace 200 millimeters back from the front and forward from the back, and with two SB 80 by 6 beams at the bottom. So let's look at how to set this up. First thing I'll do is I'll start a new sketch on the XY plane, and normally I model with symmetry about the origin, but let's say that we want to do some measurements, that we have a fixture that we need to have the origin in a particular location. And so I'll put the origin here in the lower left hand corner, and I'm going to dimension the height of this as 600, and let's assume that we might want to change the width to be other than 600. So we'll start out with it as 600, but by putting a dimension in there rather than making it equal, we can change that dimension if needed to either make the height taller or shorter, or this width narrower or greater. And then I'm going to do as the next step that a trick that a lot of people don't know about, in that I'm going to go ahead and extrude this rectangle, and I'm going to do it as a surface body rather than a solid body. So I toggle to a surface body, and I'm going to go 1,000 millimeters, and I want to go flip the direction towards the back. All right, then I'm going to do a new sketch on this top face, and I will project geometry, this edge right here and this edge right here, and then I will draw a line. Now I might just do this as a 3D sketch rather than as a 2D sketch, but I've already started the 2D sketch. But a lot of times it makes sense to do a skeleton for a frame like this as a 3D sketch. So I'll dimension from this point to this point as the 200, and I'll dimension from here to here as the 200 as well. I'll finish this sketch, and then I'm going to rotate around to the bottom, and I'll do a new sketch on the bottom, and I will draw a rectangle about like this, and then I'm going to put a line from midpoint to midpoint across that rectangle as well. I'm going to change all of these lines to construction, and then I will do a coincident, and I want to project first this bottom edge right here and this bottom edge right there, and then I'll do coincident of this line to the midpoint of this line. And then let's put some dimensions in here. So I'm going to dimension the distance 100 from here to here, and I'll dimension the distance from here over to here as, and that should have been 100. Let's change this one to 250, and then I will dimension the width of this rectangle as 800, or dimension it to the midpoint of this line. So this line is the same distance on this side of the midpoint as this one. All right, I'll finish sketch, and I'm going to turn off the dimension visibility on both of these sketches. And again, I could have done these two sketches as one 3D sketch. So a lot of times when I'm doing a frame skeleton, I prefer to use a 3D sketch on a box like, and I might use that box as a keep out zone or a keep within zone. In this case, we're going to run right down the center of the lines, but often I'll use that for keep in or keep out. Let's go ahead and save this, and I'll save this as frame generator tutorial skeleton. Then I need to place that skeleton into an assembly. I'll go to an assembly, and I'll place my skeleton, and I'll place it grounded at origin, and so there is my skeleton. And then I will go to the design tab. If you are using Vault, you'll need to log into your Vault. I'm using desktop content, so I can go directly into the insert frame, and I'm going to select a ISO standard, and I want to find square, and then I'm going to select a size of 30 by 30 and 2.5 wall thick. I'll then select this edge, and I'll select this edge, I'll select this edge, and I'll select this edge. So I have those 4 edges selected. I'll also select this edge, this edge, this edge, and this edge. So you can select actually the edges of other bodies, surface bodies or solid bodies, or you can select point to point. You don't have to have a sketch in order to select an edge. I'll get these 4 edges. I'll say OK to that, and let's just do apply to that. I'll save those components, and then I'm going to change to a rectangular shape, and for the size I will select a 50 by 30 by 2.5 wall thickness, and I will select this line line right here. Now, if we look at this from the end, we see that we need to rotate this 90 degrees. So if I drag this where it turns red at certain stop points, or I can just come over here and type in the angle that I need to rotate that as. In this case, 90 degrees. I'm then going to place the two beams down here, and so I'll do insert frame member, and I will select ISO 657/15, and for the size I'll select the SB 80 by 6, and then I will select this line and I'll select this line, and we see that we need to rotate those by 90 degrees, so I'll rotate them by 90 degrees, either 90 or 180. And then I also need to move these down, so I'm going to select this point, but I need to move it down further. Remember, this distance from here to here was 30 millimeters, so I need to move this down another 15 millimeters. So I'll do an offset of 15 millimeters, and I see that it moved it up, so I need to put in -15, and that moved it down to the bottom of our frame. I'll now turn off the visibility of the skeleton, save my file. I want these four corners to be mitered, and so I'll select miter, and I'll select these two components. I could also put a gap in here. When we make parts in the real world, we can't cut exact lengths. So if we want to weld this thing up to be perfectly square, then we need to cut some of the parts a little bit shorter so that we have some distance to play with in squaring up the parts. Because when we cut a part, some are going to be a little bit longer, some are going to be a little bit shorter. So we need our longest part to allow us a little bit of allowance to square up the parts. So I'll say apply to that, and let's just add another section. So I'll select these two, and I'll add that one. And then I'm going to put my clearance over here on this side, and I'm going to make this real nice and big so that we can see it. I'm going to say 5 millimeters. Make sure you put the units in, because I noticed that was showing inch even though I'm in a metric file. And then I will select this one and this one, and when we do that, we see that we have a clearance in between here, and then I will accept that one, and then I'll do this one and this one, and so now I see that we have a clearance down there. So we can put these two up tight against each other and then do our adjustment on this side. All right, then I want these frame members to stop at here, and so I'm going to, now I have two different choices here. I can do trim to frame, or I can do trim extend. Let's check trim to frame first, and it says select members to trim cut, and then it says select frame members to trim cut. So the tooltip doesn't really give us a good idea of what's happening. I want to select this as the piece that I'm going to use to cut with, and then I'll select this one, and we see that it trims this one back to that location. I'll say okay to that. It says that there's a problem with this because of previous end treatment that we have, so I might not want to do it that way. Let's do a manage rebuild all, make sure that we don't get any errors. So I'm not getting any errors, but I'm a little bit concerned about that technique, so let's look at a different technique. Instead of doing trim to frame, I'm going to do trim or extend, and so it says select frame members to cut or lengthen, and so I want to cut this one, and this one, and then I can select the face that I want to use to cut with, and so I can select any one of these planar faces, this one, or this one, and it will extend that out and cut those pieces off. So think of those surfaces as going out to infinity. All right, then I'm going to go ahead and trim this part, so I'm going to trim that face, that frame member, and then for the face I will select this end, and then I want to do it over on the other side. Now if I wanted to notch this to have this go around the arcs here, I can attempt to do that with trim to the frame, or I can do the notch. I want it to be flush with this face, but I'm actually going to put in an offset distance in there. So I'll select this frame member to trim. I'm going to trim it to this face, and let's do a 5 millimeter offset. I'm making that nice and big so that we can clearly see that offset. We might not want an offset that great. All right, so that gives us some clearance that we can put this part in here and weld it, and we have some adjustment here, and we can fill that gap with a weld bead. We don't necessarily have to have it that great to start with. I'm then going to trim off these two components with this one. So let's try to trim to frame again. So I'll do trim to frame, and I'm going to select first the piece to use to define, and then I want to trim this part, and we see that this one goes down and this one gets cut off, right? I'll apply that, and then I'll do that again. I'll select this one and this one. So now this one will get cut, and I'll come over here, I'll select this one, and then I want to select this one, apply that. So this gets extended. I'll select here and then here, then this one will get cut. I'm then going to trim these two members off with this frame. And I can do both of these two at the same time. So I'll do trim extend, and I will select this one, and then the face that I'll use is this face, and I want to put in an offset on this one. So I'm going to put in a 3mm offset on this one, and so we'll see that we have a little gap in between here. Now actually I decided I don't want the gap on that side, so I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to do this one, and I really intended for this one down here to have that 3mm gap. And so let's edit that end treatment, and we'll put in the 3mm gap down here. Okay, so now we see that we have a gap here, and I also want a gap over here, and so I'll edit that one with the frame generator. I will expand this one, and I'll find that trim, and I'll edit that end treatment with the frame generator, and let's put in a 3mm gap on that end. I also want a 3mm gap on this end, and so I'll find that frame member, and I'll come down and find the trim for this one. So I'll edit that with frame generator, put a 3mm gap on this end. So now I have a gap in here. So we have some allowance that we can move this piece back and forth to get everything squared up. So we need to do the same thing up here at the top. So I'll do trim to frame, or trim extend, and I'll trim this part. I'm going to use this face to trim it with the 3mm gap, and this part using this face with the 3mm gap. And then on this side I don't want the gap. We'll put butt those up against each other, and so I'll put this back to 0, and I'm going to then trim this piece with this face, and I'll trim this piece with this face. Now I want this piece to come up 3mm below the top of the frame, so I'm going to do extend, trim or extend. I'm going to extend this piece up to this face, but I don't want it to come all the way up, so I'll do a 3mm gap, so it will be slightly below. Apply that, and then I'll do the same thing over on the other side. So I'll select this part, want to come up to this top face, but with the 3mm gap. I'll say OK to that. Now I want to put an end cap on these two vertical tubes, so I will then click on Insert End Cap. I'll select this face. Now if you're using desktop content, you need to make sure you have the custom content library installed to use the frame generator end cap. So I got an error, so I need to install it into my desktop content. If I close all of my files and then I go to the active project file and I select Configure Content Center Libraries, I see that the custom content was installed, but it wasn't selected in my project file, so I have to select that. I'll say OK to that, and done, and then I'll reopen my frame, and I will then go back to the design tab, and I'll do insert end cap again, and I'll select this face, and this time I don't get an error on that. I'm going to put a fillet radius of 5 on here, and I want the thickness to be 3mm so that it will be flush with the top of the frame. And then I want an offset distance. I can do this as a percentage of the thickness of the beam, or I can put it in as a distance. I will do an offset distance of 0.5mm, and then I will add the second one, come over to the second end, and I'll select this one, and I'll say OK to this one. I want to put gussets in these 4 corners, so I will have to model those parts. So I'll do a new part file, select a metric template, and I will start a new sketch on the XY plane. I'll draw a rectangle at the origin. I'll dimension this height of the rectangle as 50, and I'll dimension this as 50. And then I'll draw a line from corner to corner across here, and I'll draw another line. I want this line parallel to this line, so if I scrub that line, don't click on it, but scrub that line, it should put the parallel constraint on there automatically. And then I'm going to dimension this distance from here to here as 12.5. I can then extrude this, and I'm going to extrude that mid-plane distance of 10mm. Save my file. I'll call it corner gusset. Now if you create a library of these gussets, then you do it one time and then you're done. So I'll then do place on the assembler tab. I'll do place, and I'll get a corner gusset. I'm going to place one in this corner. I'll place one up here, one over here, but here. I then need to constrain these gussets, so I'll do constrain, and I want this face right here constrained to this face right here, and then I want this face constrained to this face, and we'll move it in the center here in a minute. And so then I want this face constrained to here, and I want this face constrained to here. And then on this one, I want this face constrained to here, and this face, I got the wrong edge, so I'll control unselect that edge, and I'm having trouble getting it, so I'll just do the command again. So I'll do constrain this face to this face, and I've got one more. I will do this face to this face, and this face over here to this face. Alright, now I want to center these up, and if you remember earlier, I did the sketch on the front plane, and so I can go to these gussets, and I can do this a couple ways. Maybe I want this to be behind the front plane, or I want it to be in front of the front plane, or I want it to be centered up with the front plane. I'm going to do flush, and I will expand the origin XY plane. So I'm going to do flush the XY plane of the assembly to the XY plane of the first corner gusset. So that moves that one in center, and then I will do the second corner gusset. Now I need to be careful on some of these will be mate instead of flush. So I'll attempt to select the XY plane, but if it gives me an error, then I need to edit that relationship and put it on mate instead of flush. So that was the second one. For the third one, I'll select the XY plane, and for the fourth one, I'll select the XY plane and the XY plane on this one. Okay, so if I try to move these four gussets now, they are fully constrained. They don't move. So my frame members are in this folder, and then my corner gussets, and also my corners, also my end caps in this frame folder. I want to put some weld beads on here, so I'm going to go to environments. I'm going to convert this to a weldment. It gives me some warnings, and I'll go ahead and accept that warning. I'm going to tell it that my material is steel. Then I'll go in and put some weld beads. So I'll go to welding, and I can do a fillet weld. I will select this face first, and then for second face, I'll select this face and this face. I'm going to put in a bead of 3 millimeters. We see that preview. I'll apply that weld. Do the same thing over on the other side. So I'll select this face first, then second face. I'll select both this face and this face to put those weld beads in. If I want to put, now the reason for putting this chamfer in here is so that we can put a weld bead in there. Now if this part was going to be welded at the same time as these two parts, we might not need that, but if these parts were going to be welded first and then that gusset put in here, there would be a weld bead going across there. Let's go ahead and put that weld bead in here. So if I put a weld bead between here and here, we need that gusset in order to clear that weld bead. And there's some cases where we have some gaps in here, and so to do that, instead of doing a fillet weld, I'm going to do a groove weld, and I will select this face, and then for second face I'm going to select this face, and then I need to set a fill direction. I can either try to do a radial fill, and if that doesn't work, I can click on a face to set a fill direction. So let's try to select that. It would do it perpendicular to that face. So in this case, either way will work. Now once I've filled that gap, now I can put a fillet weld across there. So I could do a fillet weld and select this face, and the second face I could select this face and put that across there. Maybe I want to make this bigger, in which case I'll also select that face, and instead of 3 millimeters, let's make that 5 millimeters. So it'll go all the way across, or I could even do that bigger, let's say 6 millimeters. So continue through welding up all of the components, and that completes this tutorial.